So memorizing our unit circle is quite a lot. And so this notes, properties of the unit circle, is going to help you answer questions without looking at the unit circle. So truth of the matter is these examples we have below is probably closer to what the questions we'll see on benchmarks or end of course. And the unit circle is not on our reference sheet. So to answer these questions, if you can memorize these 3 bullet points I have listed for us, then you should be able to answer these questions fairly easily. The first one being your quadrant numbers. Do you know where your quadrants are? So to the right of our notes, I'm going to label our quadrants. Quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and quadrant 4. They do go in order top, right, and all the way around. Some teachers talk about there being a C shape for the order of 1, 2, 3, 4 of our quadrants for coordinate plane, or whatever you want C to stand for, is where your quadrants are. If you see the examples below, they all tell us what quadrant we're in, so you need to be able to recognize and relate that back to your coordinate plane. The second bullet point is where your trig functions are positive or negative. So in quadrant 1, everything is positive, positive, right? So that would be cosine is positive, sine is positive. In the second quadrant, we have negative, positive, a negative cosine, positive sine. Third quadrant, everything's negative, cosine and sine. In fourth quadrant, it is positive, negative, a positive cosine, negative sine. I'm also going to add in here our tangent values. In the first quadrant, tangent is positive. Second quadrant, tangent is negative. Third quadrant, tangent is positive. And in the fourth quadrant, tangent is negative. Remember, the second and fourth tangent's negative, capital letter N, same diagonal. So now, how are you going to memorize all of this? Well, I've got a phrase for you. I've got all students take classes. Fact, right? All students take classes. ASTC is going to be an acronym for us for our quadrants. In first quadrant, I'm going to put an A, second quadrant S, third quadrant T, and fourth quadrant C. Now, why? Well, this is going to stand for where our trig functions are positive. All students take classes is where they are positive. So in the first quadrant, we put A for all of them. Notice cosine, sine, and tangent are all positive in the first quadrant. Second quadrant, S stands for where sine is positive. And you can see there, sine is the only one positive. The rest are negative. Third quadrant, T stands for tangent is going to be the only one that is positive. And in the fourth quadrant, C stands for cosine is the only one that is positive. The rest are negative. So if you can remember, ASTC is in order of your quadrants. All students take classes is where the trig functions are positive. All of them in the first quadrant, only sine in the second, only tangent in the third, and only cosine in the fourth. That takes our second bullet point. Third bullet point, how some of our trig functions are paired. So if you look at your unit circle, you might start to notice the patterns, such as 1/2 is always paired with a square root of 3 over 2. Meaning if cosine is 1/2, the sine value is square root of 3 over 2, or vice versa. Cosine is square root of 3 over 2. It's always paired with a sine value of 1/2. These two are married. They are always, always, always together. Another one that's always paired together is square root of 2 over 2 is always paired with another square root of 2 over 2. That's always at those 45-degree angles, sine and cosine. If it's a square root of a 2 over 2, the other value, sine or cosine, is square root of 2 over 2. So those are some special pairings there. So let's see what we can put together for number 1. Number 1, if sine theta, and we use that symbol theta to represent an angle we haven't quite determined yet. So sine of an angle, sine theta, is 1/2 in the first quadrant. What's the value of cosine? I'm going to sketch ASTC in my quadrants. And we said we were in the first quadrant. where all of my trig functions are positive. They said sine theta is 1/2, and we're looking for cosine. Well, since we're in the first quadrant, I know cosine is going to be positive. And then we just talked about how they are always paired and always married. 1/2 is always paired with a square root of 3/2. So cosine theta, square root of 3/2. Number 2, cosine theta is negative square root of 2/2 in quadrant 3. What's the value of sine? I'm going to do the same thing, sketch my ASTC. In quadrant 3, 1, 2, 3, what is the value of sine? Now, in the third quadrant, T stands for tangent is positive. The rest are going to be negative. So if you want to put down here cosine and sine are going to be negative, you can do that. They already gave us cosine was negative, of course, because we're in the third quadrant. What is sine? Well, I know it's going to be negative because it's in the third quadrant. And then a square root of 2/2 is always paired with another square root of 2/2. Number 3, if cosine theta is negative square root of 3/2 in the second quadrant, what's the value of sine? I'm going to sketch out ASTC. All students take classes. They said we are in the second quadrant, so here we are, second quadrant where sine is positive, the rest are negative. They gave us cosine theta is negative square root of 3/2, negative because we're in the second quadrant. What is sine? Well, in the second quadrant, sine is positive. And then square root of 3/2 is always married and paired with 1/2. Number 4, if sine theta is -1, what is the value of cosine and tangent? 2 questions that I've loaded here for us. So this one's a little bit different. Let me still sketch a coordinate plane. If sine is -1, now remember our ordered pairs are cosine and sine. So if sine is 1, let me go to a y value that is 1. So if I went straight up to like where 90 degrees is, that would be 0, 1. If I went straight down, that would be 0, -1. Aha. I'm down here at 270 degrees or at 3 pi over 2. Here's where I am. So what is the cosine value right here? If this is cosine, this is sine. Cosine would have to be 0. What's the tangent value? Now, these are just things you have to memorize. So if we're talking about tangent up and down, if you remember back from the unit circle, I described how to memorize tangent when you're at 90 or 270 degrees. It's up and down vertical. Like slope, it would be undefined. So your tangent value here is undefined. All right, number 5, if tangent theta is undefined, well, we were just talking about that. If I sketch a coordinate plane, undefined tangents is up and down, so up at 90 or at 270. So if tangent's undefined, what's the value of cosine? Okay, so just piggybacking off what we were talking about, these ordered pairs straight up at 90 would be 0, 1, 0, -1, and it's always cosine, sine, cosine, sine. So I know that they're asking about tangent when it's undefined, what's the value of cosine? And we had 2 places, tangent's undefined at the top and bottom. So there's 2 places where that's equivalent. However, there's only one answer here because cosine is always 0 where tangent's undefined. Cosine theta is 0. Number 6, if tangent is -1 in the fourth quadrant, what's the value of sine and cosine? So all students take classes. Fourth quadrant is down here. Tangent is -1. Now, tangent is -1 is at those 45 degree marks, those halfway marks in each of our quadrants. So we're talking about somewhere right here in the middle is where tangent is equal to -1. We're also in the fourth quadrant. Cosine is the only one that's positive, right? Cosine is positive, sine is going to be negative. So if we're looking for sine theta, sine is going to be negative, like I said. Now, at those 45 degree marks, remember, I love 45 degree. They're so easy to remember. They're right there in the middle. What are the sine and cosine values right there at 45 degrees? square root of 2 over 2 also married with a square root of 2 over 2. So sine and cosine are going to be square root of 2 over 2. I just need to check my signs to make sure that they're falling in the fourth quadrant. So sine is going to be square root of 2 over 2. Cosine in the fourth quadrant is positive, but also always married with a square root of 2 over 2. There's your two answers. Sine negative square root of 2 over 2, cosine positive square root of 2 over 2. So practice those, guys. The first three, they were kind of good, kind of easy. We had to think a little bit harder on those last three, but it all boils down to, do you know where your quadrants are? Do you know where the trig functions are positive or negative? If you remember, all students take classes or some kind of mnemonic device to remember ASTC. That'll tell you or remind you where your functions are positive, the rest are negative. Your trig functions are also always paired 1/2 with square root of 3 over 2. Those are always married. A square root of 2 over 2 is always paired with another square root of 2 over 2 every time, regardless, always, forever. Okay, so try those, practice those. If you can do that, you can answer questions on our benchmarks. Okay, I'll see you in class.